So I am happy to be joined today by my good friend Greg Fish, a Ukrainian, an American writer who's a computer scientist, international radio contributor, author of Cyberpunk Survival Guide, and he worked with Rant on me, or worked on Rant with me, and and we basically created a media startup, and we were doing some really good work back then, and we worked on some tech projects too, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to have my brother here so we could talk through this really interesting development in AI. But before we get to all that, uh, thank you for being here, Greg.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate having you here. The audience, I see you here chiming in. We got some familiar faces. Adam Ali, who was here yesterday. What's up? See you in the comment section. I see you, Leslie, Jennifer from Columbus, Ohio, Carly from Virginia. I see you. Leslie in California, one of my favorites is in here. What is up? Yes, I love the hearts. We've talked about this, guys. We established the unlimited likes here. So yes,
Yeah.
thank you, and engage. If you have questions for us as we go through this, we're going to be talking through some complex AI stuff, and Anthropic standing up to Trump. So feel free to chime in. So before we begin, I just want to give a lay of the land for some people about what has happened over the last few days here. So effectively, the Pentagon has these contracts with several AI companies. They have it with OpenAI, XAI, which is Grok, basically Google, and Anthropic, right? And earlier this year, they basically sent out a memo and to re-sign contracts with everybody to say, hey, we want to basically use your AI unfettered, right? We want to use your AI for all lawful purposes, right? And Anthropic and the other three signed, but Anthropic, which is led by CEO Dario Amade, who's doing pretty good here, he said, no, actually, wait, maybe specify a little bit more on the lawful part, right? And we actually want to carve out, we don't want to be using Claude, our AI tool, to do mass surveillance or autonomous, basically killing, right? We don't want autonomous weapons to be using Claude. And the Pentagon, eerily, was like, actually, we don't want to cede to that. And then that's where we got to this point on Friday where there was a blow up where they were maybe close to getting a deal, but then the Pentagon informed, according to New York Times reporting, right here we see that the Trump administration, on a call with Anthropic executives, basically said that the Pentagon wanted to allow for the collection and analysis of unclassified commercial bulk data of Americans, including geolocation and web data. So basically, mass surveillance. And so Anthropic was like, no. And then as a result of that, the Trump administration has retaliated. They have designated Anthropic a supply chain risk, which is an unprecedented maneuver against an American company. And they have gone ahead and banned Anthropic systems in government work, and then they then went ahead and signed a deal with OpenAI instead. So that's where we stand now. Greg, what is your take?
My take is that actually Anthropic is doing the right thing here. But before we start rushing to, welcome to the resistance, that there's a reason behind it. So even back in the 60s when AI was really getting started as a concept, as an idea, there was the saying that a machine cannot be held liable for a mistake because what it does is the reflection of the programming that it receives, whether it's training, it doesn't really matter. It's just the fact that a machine cannot be held liable because a machine does not have free will. Therefore, a machine cannot be allowed to make a management decision. So
Yes.
Anthropic is basically following that principle. And I'm just going to get to the chase here. What happens is when the government is doing the surveillance, so a lot of things that they do is they will go to social media platforms, they will go to data brokers, and will buy in bulk data on millions of Americans, and then they will. What they're trying to do is this is a lot of data. This is millions and millions and millions of records, potentially billions of data points at any given time when they're trying to analyze it. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to feed it into AIs and try and make sense out of it.
Mm.
However, what Anthropic realized, and actually all of them realized, but I think the reason why Anthropic is so concerned about this is because they're worried that these machines lie. One of the most insidious things you can do with large language models, the thing about it is large language models are basically a type of classifier. And really what they're meant to do is they're meant to analyze linguistics. They're not really meant to do logic. So when you try to make them do logic, one of the worst things you can do is you can pre-prompt them, which is when you submit a prompt, you can have a little thing in the background that tells it what you want it to do. And there's a whole art to it. And sometimes people feed it literally thousands of pages worth of instructions. You think you're typing in just a couple sentences, but in reality, there's like a megabyte of instruction that it digested beforehand. And so what you could do is you could say, we want X percentage of people caught, or we want to see X percentage of detection. And the LLM will make it so it's X percentage of people for detection. It can be very easily abused into this very Kafkaesque tool where you are just statistically supposed to be guilty and therefore you are.
Yep.
And the other problem with it is that when people say that large language models lie, um, they don't lie in a very brazen way. They lie in a very sophisticated way. There's a lot of little things that they fudge along the way. So that conviction that they will have, that detection they will have, that you're doing something wrong, you're doing something bad, they're going to make up stuff. And it's going to sound very convincing because that's what they're really good at. It's going to look very confident. It's going to look very good. And then when you could confront it and you can say, hey, this doesn't seem right. It's like, yeah, of course it's not right. I made it up. You told me to make it up. But that's the worry. The
Yeah.
worry is that people are going to abuse it this way, and then they're going to come for Anthropic, and Anthropic wants to protect its ass, for the
Yeah.
lack of a.
I
It's a
think
CYA thing.
Yeah, I think that's a component of it as well. Because I mean, I think what you're basically saying is that these AI models make mistakes, which is what they do, right? They make mistakes, and when you have a government here that is, yeah, there's bias. Yeah, it can also. I mean, Claude is much better than ChatGPT on that from my experience, but it does still make mistakes. And what Anthropic is saying, but before you continue, is that they don't want these models deployed at this scale, not just on the surveillance front, but also on the autonomous weapons front.
Mhm.
Because the thing is, it's because of these mistakes, it's the tech's not ready for that, right? And
Yeah.
it's not that they would actually deploy it for that just yet, because it's not there. But they wanted to put that in the contract because they wanted to effectively say, we don't want you ever using this for that in the future. And they clearly got wind that that was what the Trump administration was intending. And right now they're using Claude on the classified systems, but when you have commercial data and you want to basically aggregate what the other models are giving them. So for example, Google searches, credit card info, if you want to pull all of that together, you can then create a system. I don't think it's just the fear of the mistakes that Anthropic's worried about. It's also just the from what I'm seeing, the articulation of from the CEO is that just the efficiency of civil liberties violations that this would bring. Because yeah, there'll be mistakes, but it'll also make it incredibly easy for, let's say, if you have a US visa that you're considering and you want to scan their entire social media right there, you can do that. They don't want to even do that. So from what I'm seeing is that it's the combination of, like you outlined there greatly, how these models can make mistakes and then convince themselves of the mistakes and the lies, right? There's the mistakes that are compounding there. There is the efficiency it could provide for the surveillance. And then there's this, the potential for mistakes in war, which could happen, right? So there's that aspect as well.
And the mistakes being on purpose, I think, is the other problem where if you have an administration that says, "Oh, we want this to work, but if there's going to be mistakes, we're going to understand what the mistakes are." There's really no presumption of good faith here, so
Exactly.
they will take the mistakes. They'll be fine. It's the kind of the same thing as the Soviet Union used to do when they would go after dissidents, when they would go after people that they didn't like.
Mhm.
Their whole thing was, yes, it may make a mistake, but that's fine. We'll take the mistake because the mistake lets us get rid of this person. It really doesn't matter. We just need a justification for the kangaroo court,
Yeah,
and we're off from there. And I think there's also the philosophies of the different companies. So when you talk
exactly.
about AI, you generally are talking about Anthropic and OpenAI. And I think OpenAI is very close to this kind of like this singularitarian cultish thing that Silicon Valley had going for a long time. And I have a lot of things on the Cyberpunk Survival Guide about this. So when we repost it, I'll repost it on Cyberpunk Survival Guide, I'll have all of the links to all of the relevant articles. So this will be one of them. But yeah, the general idea is that, we're just going to build the biggest model we can, and we're going to make it do all of these things. And eventually it'll be this amazing, incredible thing they need to invest trillions in. And Anthropic is very much, we're actually trying to build a real tool with real uses, and we're trying to figure out how to actually do it right. And I think that's the biggest difference between the two companies. And again, this is just my opinion based on what I've seen and how
Yeah.
I've used both. But
And
that's the impression that I've gotten.
And I have a follow-up question on that, because actually I was going to talk about that later. But on that front, with the different philosophies we can get, and for those watching, we're going to get to the impact of like tech companies standing up to Trump, period, because I think that's significant. So stick around for that as well. And we're going to get to all the facets of AI. So definitely keep smashing that like button. It's unlimited likes, guys. If you have questions about AI generally, about this Anthropic issue, feel free to throw it in the chat. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, subscribe to me, Ahmed Baba News, and consider becoming a paid subscriber to my independent journalism. And also subscribe to Cyberpunk Survival Guide. Greg Fish is doing great tech analysis over there, and broader societal analysis, cultural analysis as well. So definitely check that out. So yeah, on that point, that's a great point about the different philosophies, because what we're seeing is that Dario and Anthropic, they're actually telling their investors, like, they have 14 billion in annual revenue, right? And they're telling the investors, we have these benchmarks to hit, and they're being honest from what I can see about those benchmarks. And when you actually hear from the employees, they actually seem to have more of a mission. They actually are talking about doing this safely, where Sam Altman clearly paid lip service to that, but he's promising super intelligence.
Yeah.
So he is making vast, unattainable, frankly, promises to his investors that are juicing the valuation to the point where it does provide risks for bubbles, right? And we'll you definitely got to look into the circular lending happening, which we can get into later in this episode. But I think that's a great point, is those different philosophies between Anthropic and OpenAI that we're seeing.
And I think I need to jump in and point out that if you asked 20 computer scientists what is super intelligence or AGI, you will come away with 50 different answers.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not AGI, super intelligence are not real things. A guy named Nick Bostrom came up with, he popularized the term. He didn't really come up with it, but he popularized the term on a paper that was basically a bunch of number crunching. It's essentially, what if Wikipedia, but sentient? And it would be smarter than all of humanity. And then he did a whole bunch of numerology on it. And that's where the whole concept of superintelligence comes from. It's not a real actual thing. There are people who are working on the idea of what it would take to have an actually intelligent model, but you have to look at somebody like Jan LeCun. You have to look at a lot of robotics labs. That's what they're pursuing, because they say, okay, the language analysis is great and everything, but it's one teeny tiny component. Understanding the environment is really where this is going. And I think this is where Anthropic fits very neatly, because they want to be one of those components. It's like you can talk to the machine. Basically, the machine can understand what you're trying to say and give you a response back by analyzing the narrative of what you've given it, and then you can have it do other things, which is where the whole automation for work comes in. Because there were people who have used it to basically relay spoken commands and automate things, and there's couple ways that can be done. Like, for example, let's say you have a drone. Now, a drone would have an API, basically. API stands for Application Programmable Interface. Is just a bunch of calls that you can make to the robot with precise instructions on what you want it to do. And the idea is you can speak it and it will do it. It's not a very efficient interface, though. So one of the things that I thought, well, how would they actually do it? And one of the laziest and easiest ideas would be, you have remote control programs that control drones, and they're not very sophisticated. A lot of them actually run on XP, funny enough. And the idea is you could overlay it, and then you can use the text detection from an AI system to basically figure out what button to push on the screen, which is a really terrible way to do it, partially because there's latency, because you have to go around. So a lot of this immediate real-time stuff is actually not going to work. It will be faster if a person just does it. But the other problem is that if it does that, if you can get a virus into the networks, and this has happened. People have gotten viruses inside of these. Now, these were not viruses that actually compromised the drones, but it's entirely possible that they could, because if something is badly encrypted, if somebody's like, oh, I don't want to install the latest update, they're running on older systems because that's what's compatible. You have a virus, it changes what the text says, and now all of a sudden you have control over what this thing does around the drones. It's a massive safety risk. It's a massive attack vector, and I really do think that the people in Anthropic are just smart enough to look at this and go, "Oh, hell no, we don't want to
Yeah,
deal with any of this. Let the sleazy used car salesman Altman get his ass rocked by these kinds of scandals. We're
yeah,
staying out."
yeah. Because that's spot on. You're talking about the complexity of, first off, using this system, trying to use this system autonomously, which is what it apparently Anthropic got wind that the Trump administration might do before the tech is ready for fully autonomous. But what Anthropic is arguing for is basically like, at least have a human in the loop. At least have a
Well,
human in the loop, and
it's not even that. It's not. They're using a system in a way that it's not really meant to be used.
exactly. And just
The-
give me a, before we get too wonky on, I wanted to just kind of like drill down on this specifically, because I think it's key that they stood up and said, no, we do not want this tech to be used here. Because I think for a second it seemed like, OpenAI, from what I saw, Sam Altman really went and got a, he sent out a statement to his staff saying that he was going to basically stand in solidarity with Anthropic's demands, and then within hours went ahead and signed a deal with the Trump admin, claiming that those demands were met, even though they weren't. Or maybe they, but that doesn't really make sense. You're gonna, on one hand, say we'll never cede to Anthropic's demands, and then an hour later you're going to sign a deal with Altman saying you are. But basically, before we get into some of like the wonky technical aspects of how it would actually work, just the definitive nature of this move on Amodi's part, like to sit there and not, and to say no. This is probably the first major company, period, like tech company especially, that has stood up to Trump in this way. And you would hope it would start a domino effect, but that doesn't seem to be the case yet. But what do you think about the ramifications of that standing up, and whether or not it'll give a permission structure for others? Because as we see Anthropic's being rewarded in the market, they're now number one in the chat, the chatbots in the App Store, and they're being rewarded financially, probably going to make way more revenue than that $200 million contract.
That's exactly it. I'm so glad that you brought that up because that's exactly where I was going to go next. They're being rewarded. People are like, these are serious people.
Mhm.
Altman, he opens his mouth and three different things come out at the same time. Modi opens his mouth. It's a consistent message. He's careful.
Yep.
He's cautious. He's building a real tool. He's built a reputation for reliability. For
Mhm.
Claude, I use Claude for some of my it's actually kind of interesting because for like really low level code, like really small, tiny little things, I'll use ChatGPT 5 Codex periodically. But if I need something major, if I need to verify a database design, if I need to write a bunch of unit tests, I'll use Claude because I get much better results and it's much more consistent. It's a lot less hit or miss. So, like, he's building this quiet reputation. He's getting respect. He's getting financial rewards. And that does, in fact, create that permission structure for other
Yep.
companies saying, hey, if we flip a middle finger to these incompetent buffoons who are trying to just have their way with us however they feel like, our stock price will go up. Our downloads will go up. Our valuations will go up. There's financial reward in standing up to these people. And if there's one thing that these people understand is money. So if we get paid every time we tell them no, yeah, let's do it. Let's tell them no. Because I will bet you that a lot of these tech companies, the reason why they weren't standing up to the administration is because they thought our investors will be mad. Because how many of our investors probably donated to Trump's campaign? We don't want to piss them off because they're just going to fire us. And that's the other thing. We look at a CEO and we say, well, as a CEO, the CEO is kind of a mascot. Let's be honest. The CEO sits in meetings, and the only thing that they're there to do is maximize shareholder return under the Friedman-esque view of the world, which I have like 17 million problems with it. But if we go into that, this live is going to be going for 45 hours. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to limit it at that. But what's going to happen is if they stand up and there's a massive financial penalty, they're going to get fired because you had the CEO of Target say, "We're not doing any of this DI shit anymore. There's a new boss in town." And look what happened. The
Hmm.
company got pummeled. A lot of people who were just the joke was, people go into Target for a $5 for like a $5 soft drink. They come up with a $500 carts full, right? That's gone. That stopped. There's people still boycotting Target to this
Yep.
day. They're getting the CEO had to get out. They're trying to replace him because the investor said, this is your job, your family, it's your job. So I think this is what they were afraid of. So now that they have the resistance, and I think that's why Sam Altman tried to immediately backpedal, because he saw the immediate rewards for Anthropic. He's like, no, whoa, no, hold on, crap, I miscalculated on that one.
Yep.
So I do think that this is in fact giving them enough permission structure. So if you are all of a sudden a fan of Claude and you're doing the downloads and you're paying them a little bit, that actually does help.
Yeah.
That's the only language these people understand is money.
Exactly, and that's what we're seeing. And I've been using Claude, and it's just significantly better for code and for writing feedback or really just thoughts generally. So it's also it's also just a commercial product that's better. But now if they have a moral purpose, and you're right, if you have an economic structure in place where it shows that decency is incentivized, then you're going to see more of that. And I think you're right. These CEOs, they're afraid of the administration. They've been afraid of the Trump administration's blowback. I mean, I think the designation of the supply chain risk won't hold up in court, but it's a really severe punitive measure. But again, they're being rewarded financially, and I think hopefully it leads to others to do the same, because like you said, Target was a prime example. I don't think it's really set in maybe until this Anthropic thing, and hopefully the takeaway for other companies is that this, if you stand up to this administration, you will get financially rewarded by a segment of the population, by the majority of the population, and you might rise to the top of that app store or that market that you're competing in. And that is the message people need to see. Economic tools, not just as boycotts, but as supporting the people you want to see thrive, which obviously, just a quick segue
Mhm.
on that, independent media, subscribe, support the people you want to see rise to the top as well. And yes, we see you guys in the comments. If you guys have questions, throw them in, keep engaging,
Yep.
keep hitting that like button. Um, but yeah, I mean, I really think on this Anthropic front, there's a difference in philosophy, because what we're seeing here with this surveillance state, I also want to touch on just for a little bit, is we have Palantir already fully enthralled with the administration, helping them gather a lot of that data, right? And then now, if you have that in AI system, which would help analyze it more efficiently and also make mistakes, you're in a system where you have technology powered authoritarianism to surveil and suppress dissent, target people either financially or target them legally. You have a situation where and I think Anthropic saw this. You see, if you look at Dario's interviews, the CEO of Anthropic, he's speaking about these threats to civil liberties. He's talking about American values. He's talking about upholding the Constitution in the face of this. So, like, when you're thinking about the surveillance state that could potentially be brewing here, and Anthropic standing up, do you think that this is a big warning sign of what is actually internally being sought to do? If you have a company, a good, massive government contractor saying we're out because of this risk.
Yes, and I think the other big thing is that the people in tech, we're also speaking out a lot more. There's a lot. I mean, I'm part of conversations where we say we're not doing that because that's just the things you could do, the abuse that you could cause with this is stupid. We're not doing this as a massive liability. We're not going to have our names on it. And I think that there's a kind of with this whole conversation, a lot of companies had like, oh, we can replace you with AI. There's a kind of this fuck it allness that is happening in some of these higher level conversations where people like me will say, I'm not doing this. This is a terrible idea. I don't think that we've thought this through. I think we need to consider all of the other implications. Because what do people who actually pay for all this stuff, your typical commercials client want? they want to know that their data is safe, that the
Yeah.
information that they're trusting you is going to stay safe, that there's not going to be a massive data breach, and they're going to have all of their private data leaked, and this is going to be used for credit card scams and so on and so forth.
Or
This is very
surveillance.
basic stuff. So now that the same data that could be used for credit card scams is being snooped out by the government, could be used to potentially go after random people because the AI was told to hit a certain percentage. No, people don't want to be responsible for that. And you can say, I'm not doing this. You can fire me if you want, because you want to fire me anyway and replace me with AI. And a lot of companies have also now figured out, after a couple of years of trying this, that no, you actually do need a human in the loop, because the
Yes.
AI is only as good as the humans who are prompting it, who are operating it, who are checking it. The amount of gatekeeping you need to put to actually have a proper commercial product with an AI core is tremendous. So you need those people's expertise. So companies are a lot more loath to do it.
Mm.
And at the same time, again, this is kind of a blanket statement and may vary company by company, but that's the big thing. Inside of tech, people are speaking up because we see exactly where it's going, because we can build these tools, so we know exactly how they're going to be abused. And a lot of us are like, well, we don't want to build. You remember we had a live before where I said, when you build the Kafka-esque torture machine, they might just test it on you. But we don't want to do that. We don't want to build a Kafka torture machine, because we don't want to be the ones who are going to go through it. And if they can eventually find people to do this, but by that point they have so much ill will, they have spent so much money, and they've had such negative press, and their competitors have just gotten rewarded, that their investors are going to be like, "What the fuck are you doing?"
Exactly. Yeah. No, you're right. And then that's great that you're seeing that anecdotally in tech and in the company you're working in, to be able to push back and think about the ramifications. Cause, I think the more people need to do that. When we see the Anthropic CEO, he actually was handing out, I think the book, was called, oh, I don't know exactly what it's called. It's not the American Prometheus. It's not the bio of Oppenheimer, but it is a book about how the atomic bomb was created. And he would tell his employees to read it. Right. And I think the reason why is because of this, because if you build a machine, you have to know that it could be used for nefarious purposes, right?
Yep.
And Oppenheimer obviously was very internally morally conflicted about all of it, but did it anyway. And that the technology will be used, right? It will be used by someone, and you have to think through the ramifications of that. And that's why also we can't rely wholly on the individual morals of these individual companies. You have Musk with XAI over there doing what he's doing, right? And then you have a situation in which uh, you have Anthropic now with their own morals and OpenAI, and this is why regulation is so important. And this is why I think if we weren't debating whether the sky is blue or whether people deserve to die or have rights or not, or whether or not ICE should be abducting random people on the streets, we would be having a fundamental, definitive conversation about AI. I think that would be maybe the dominating conversation of our society and our culture and political climate, would be, how are we going to regulate this massively disruptive technology that is not only going to displace a lot of workers, it's going to potentially lead to autonomous weapons. It's going to lead to a situation. It could enable a surveillance state. It can do so many things, and yet we're not having these discussions. Instead, we have Donald Trump trying to, via executive order, put a moratorium on what states can do to regulate AI, let alone the federal government. So, I think we're in a situation where it's just Trump has so flattened the debate that we're not even having the meaningful discussions we need to be having about the proliferation of AI technology and how to make it safe at a systemic level, not just relying on the individual principles and terms of service of individual AI companies' internal systems.
Yeah, and that's kind of his superpower, to flatten the debate to the dumbest possible thing that is also the shiniest. But there's actually a question that came through that I saw. Unfortunately, I didn't see who, just because of where the
It's
screen is. So,
Adam.
oh, fantastic. So how can these LLMs run on classified networks without introducing exploits? I don't know, because a lot of them require extreme compute power. So unless you have a very private data center that is completely air gapped, that only talks to these classified networks, there's always the potential for something either sneaking in or leaking out, because when you can just prompt it back about the information, because the security part of it is really just the pre-prompt that says, please don't leak any classified information. So but that's very easily jailbroken through a lot of rhetorical techniques. So that's really the concern. The other thing that I think, and this is kind of the future of AI, the future of AI is to have a model running on a chip. Right now, the big race that nobody's talking about, because everyone's really focused on this, this financial Habsburg family tree of deals, where people are buying compute power from models they haven't created yet,
Yeah.
to run on chips that haven't been manufactured yet, to
Yep.
be installed in servers that don't exist yet, in data centers that haven't even been approved yet. So it's this whole, that's the bubble part. Is all of this actually going to be worth it? And I think the answer is no, because you have big people like Apple, for example. You have, I think Nvidia is probably doing it. They're not going to tell anybody because they don't want to sabotage their deals. But I'm going to bet that they're actually doing this. And this is just, I'm not betting this on Polymarket. I just wanted to fully disclose that. Not trying to war profiteer here. But I do think they probably have a skunkworks that's doing this. You could create certain very specialized chip. They're called FPGAs, field programmable gate arrays, that do very, very, very specific things. And you can essentially embed a lot of the large language models in hardware and a lot of different AI architectures in hardware. And then you have them on these chips, very powerful chips inside of a device. So you have an entire data center running in your device. And that changes dynamics tremendously, because now all of a sudden your data is protected because behind that gated wall. Now you're doing your own analysis. Now you're downloading these things and running them, or potentially getting a new update where they rewire some gates, actually a firmware update to do this. And so that changed the equation tremendously. So you have purveyors of these models that are also selling access to them are going to have to rethink their model. So all of a sudden, you're not going to have this gigantic compute for everything. People are going to be doing this on a chip. People are going to be doing
Exactly.
it. People are going to be doing this on their own devices, and this entire financial domino of this domino setup of we're going to buy all this future compute because this compute will grow infinitely does not apply. And it's just fascinating to me to see the same people. Now I've been involved with some sort of tech or singularity stuff as an observer and a frequent irritant since 2009. And the same people who were talking about having a supercomputer in your hand or something like, we're going to sell access to data centers and that's going to be our model, data centers forever, data centers overall. And no, no, that was never the plan. The plan was you run it on chip inside of a device. Your data center build outs are probably not going to stand the test of time. So all of these future deals is nothing but hype. And what worries me is I do think that some of these people, maybe they're too delusional, maybe they're too far gone, but there are definitely people who understand that, but they're still going out and talking about all these data centers are going to open and all
Because
these
they want to
compute that
juice
they're
up,
going to do.
they want to juice up their valuations. And on that note, I want to also move over to like how AI is impacting people's everyday lives.
Yeah.
But also the you could see the advantages shift. Like, let's say China moves on Taiwan, right? For the Taiwanese semiconductor company. For those who don't know, the company in Taiwan basically generates a significant portion, the majority of manufacturing the chips that power all our AI devices and the NVIDIA designs, right? So you have that pipeline, you have these bottlenecks, and then you have the laser, I think is in Switzerland, that basically is able to write on those NVIDIA chips and design them, right? So you have this bottleneck here, right? And then once that bottleneck is gone, let's say that's going to be a massive disruption for NVIDIA's manufacturing capacity. And Trump's already greenlit new chips. I think it was H200
Hmm.
over to China, which they were already able to do significantly more with less before. So the China's going to move ahead on there, and then now you're talking about this other innovation of these entire basically models running on chips and in your device, which will then massively disrupt the system. Which then meanwhile you have NVIDIA buying stakes in companies, and then that company using that money to buy chips from NVIDIA back. So you have a circular loop of lending happening among the Magnificent Seven companies. It's not
Yep.
just happening with startups, among the Magnificent Seven companies. So You have that risk, and then you have 1,300 AI startups that have worth hundreds of millions of dollars that have no revenue at all, right?
They're rappers around the big guys' models. That's all they are.
Exactly,
They're just
wrappers
not.
around the big guys models, because the moment these larger companies release an additional feature, it wipes out several of these small AI companies. So the startups are going to fail. And that luckily doesn't have as much liquidity, so that doesn't have as big of an impact. We saw those valuation corrections in private equity happen in the social media bubble in the 2010s. But now here with these chips, I think the Magnificent Seven companies will survive, of course, because they're just too big to fail. But we could see 30 to 40% reductions in valuations if that bubble pops. And then because all of it's built up on, like we're talking about earlier, Sam Altman's fake promises of some esoteric super intelligence, which we're probably just going to end up seeing them define it as whatever they think they need to do. Because we're going to get to a point where the money is going to seek a return, where the money is going to say, you're promising us super intelligence for 10 years straight now. Now we're at a point where we don't have it. And then Sam Altman is going to say, this lid ChatGPT 9 is actually super intelligence.
The money knows that super intelligence is bullshit. I just want to be super clear. The money is
You think
desperate.
it's a grift? You think it's just all a grift?
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is, because you have to remember that a lot of that money comes from sovereign wealth funds. These are
Yeah.
people who are up against the wall. They need to generate more returns, especially Saudi money, because the Saudis need to move past petroleum. They need to move past their current model, and they need to diversify their economies. And the easiest way to diversify it is to jump in tech. So when somebody son of PeopleSoft Bank. I think that's the name of the bank. The one who underwrote WeWork,
No, yeah, I think it's a Saudi
or
wealth fund.
SoftBank, yeah.
Oh, SoftBank, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so people, yeah, there we go. So people like SoftBank, people who pitch these sovereign funds, they tell them, oh, the new singularity, the new industrial revolution, and what they hear is blah 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 blah. We get 20% back on our money. Okay, great, cool, we'll invest. So they're just riding it out to see how far it's gonna go. They don't care about any of that. The only thing they care about is the return on the investment. And when that return dips below their acceptable threshold, they're going to take their money and they're going to move it to somebody else. And the way that the big guys are going to survive this, the way that I don't know about Meta, because honestly, I don't know what the hell they're trying to do with Llama and their AI ventures, trying to post as dead people, trying to simulate, a lot
Yeah,
of fake activity
they don't have
online.
much
I don't know what
utility.
they're
Yeah.
doing. Yeah, I don't know what they're doing. But I know Google and Microsoft are very heavily invested in medical AI, AI that is going to treat superbugs,
Yeah.
AI that is going to help diagnose and treat cancer, AI that is going to predict the weather better. They have these very real uses, but they don't get a lot of love because they're nerd stuff. Nobody cares about the nerd stuff. Who cares if we can predict the weather better? Well, actually, a lot of people do. A lot of scientists do. They can use that in climate modeling. They can
Of course.
predict
Yeah.
better yields. They can predict what the fallout from storms is going to be. Obviously, antibiotic resistance is a massive, massive problem that we, for some reason, don't really talk about, even though that's probably one of the, if you ask me to rank some of the biggest problems that we are going to have as a society, climate change, antibiotic resistance, microplastics, and the pollution in orbit is going to be are going to be like on the top of the list. And there are AIs that will help us solve all of this problem, and they do exist. They are there. They are built. They're being experimented on, but it's a slower process because you have to go through and test it through hundreds of experiments. And there are actually AIs that currently have discovered a new class of antibiotics, but that's great, but you still have to take them to the trial, which is going to take
Yeah.
years. They've
Exactly.
discovered new vaccines. You still have to take them to trial. It's going to take years. So these AIs are out there. They're working, and that's the backup plan, because
Yeah.
Google and Microsoft are going to turn around and say, look at all this look at all these amazing AI investments we have, and investors say, sweet, here's more money. And I actually
Yeah.
think that will be great, because that's going to be
Yeah.
really good money going after good causes.
Exactly. And we only have a few minutes here left. So I wanted to pivot a little bit rather get in more detail there. But yeah, I think you're right, because there are real utilities there. That's the bottom line, is that there's a significant amount of utility in AI, and that's where I want to end here with, because Roxanne's saying, where is this AI? It can't be LLM that solve these problems. Well, actually, LLMs aren't really the main state of AI at the moment. I'd say I think Claude, especially in Anthropic, AI agents are really doing a significant amount of innovation here. Cloud Code, effective, especially as well, where you're basically managing these entities that are going off and doing work for you. And they're not just large language models; they're actually doing analysis. They're actually doing things and then coming back to you. And then there's this human in the loop, um, you know, steps that you can insert into these AI agents where they can do some work for you, check back in with you, whether it's analyzing a genome, whether it's doing, and then it'll come back to you to check their work. And you can basically manage them, and you can have some of these agents manage other AI agents. So there's all this innovation there. So one of the things I wanted to end on was kind of just as people look forward to this future of AI in the next years to come, and we're talking about great displacement, which we will have a significant amount of displacement, because as you're talking about, while we're all in agreement that the superintelligence esoteric goal is just it's just a fugazi. There is real disruption happening here back on Earth, and real utilities, and that's why I do encourage everyone. You have to use it. If in any of your professional work, Greg, you're an engineer yourself. You're talking about how you use it. You use Cloud Code. You use AI, and it's one of those things where, in order to get my friend, our friend Zach Ali, he tells me this all the time. He's the one that convinced me to move over to Claude, and basically talking about this need for everyone to be using AI to not only fill gaps in their own productivity, but just to learn the technology, because we're going to be in a society where not just middle management, but like these lower level entry level jobs are going to be eviscerated, and you're going to be judged on the way that you manage um, AI agents in some of these higher tech jobs, and some of these lower, which were before lower, now entry level could be middle management, right? And you're gonna. So I think for everyone watching, try to go get well versed in these tools, because there's going to be massive disruption, and Trump is not doing anything to help us learn about that. But I see Adam Ali in here saying there's an enormous blind spot emerging on the left that's anti AI. Yeah, yes, I agree. I think on the left there's a lot of, just like, because of the energy usage, people block it out and don't want to use it. Professionally, I plead with you guys. You have to use it, or you're going to be left behind in the job market.
And also the energy part is overblown. Some of the
Yeah,
some
yeah,
of the estimates are up to 100. Yeah, it's more expensive than Google search, but probably you probably shouldn't use it as Google, but it's important in other areas. And I think one of the big things that I like to try to point out when I talk about this is that disruption was always the plan. It was the plan since 1900 that we're going to have this machinery that does all the busy work for us, and we become very much supervisors, and we don't have to labor for a living. We can pursue our passions, our interests. We're more researchers, entrepreneurs, artists, and we use these AIs and these AI agents to just kind of do the stuff that we need to do to keep things running without us even having to think about it, try and reduce complexity among themselves so we don't have to just, it's the old phrase of, I don't want to have to spend 8 hours with people I don't like doing things I don't want to do so I can buy toilet paper and groceries. I
yeah,
want
yeah,
to
yeah,
do something else while the machine takes care of it for me. And that has always been the plan. This is gonna come no matter what, and the problem is really that we aren't prepared, and that really shakes the
yes,
foundations of these ideas of modern capitalism that are really shaped by ancient Puritanism and Calvinism, and these very honestly, in many cases, very racist and classist views that
yeah,
we need to actually talk about, and that's not the discussion that's happening now, unfortunately. But I can see why it's not happening. It's a very complicated discussion that we have
yes,
completely thrown
exactly,
aside for the past 40 years, and we can't catch up on 40 years of conversation in
exactly,
a single live.
and we're going to do more of this as well. And also, one more point on that. Arlene, you're saying you're anti AI, and you're talking about the layoffs. I also want to empathize with those who do feel anti-AI, and it does need regulation, Arlene. That's what we are. We also argued earlier in this. I totally agree. Is that there's a situation where it needs regulation. We need robust debate, and I'm very anti-AI in the arts. I'm very anti-AI in significantly when it comes. Yeah, like I think I'm anti-AI when it comes to replacing creativity. When it comes to firing an editor because you want to use it to like create some random video. No, Arlene, no, totally. I appreciate you commenting there, because I actually think it's necessary to point out that it's a nuanced topic. Like I think we need to be using AI for our technical tools and to fill some productivity gaps. When it comes to, yes, art especially, AI should not be creating art, replacing human there. AI should not be replacing commentators. I think also one more point. We're gonna have to do a whole nother. We have to go, but
Yeah,
we're gonna have to do a whole nother live because there's this thing where I think we're about to see a premium on humanity. Frankly, I
yeah.
think we're gonna now see, as more AI content proliferates, as more AI takes over, we're gonna see people needing to pay and want to have that human touch. They're not gonna want a podcast with two AI folks talking to each other. They're gonna want this. So, Greg, any final points before I sign off and tell everybody thank you?
Yeah, I want to agree with you on that. There's definitely going to be a premium for humans. It's going to take a while to realize that because right now we're not having uh just a good environment around it. But the way that I look at it is being AI is like being anti-fork. It's a very useful tool when you want to eat, but probably shouldn't be stabbing people in the eye. And we're kind of trying to do both eating and stabbing, and we should just not
That's
do the stabbing. It's actually pretty simple.
that's
And
actually so that's pretty
I just
funny.
want to point out I use Claude for code. I don't use it for the actual newsletter. So all the stuff on
Yes,
the newsletter
yes,
on Cyberpunk Survival Guide. That's all me. I write it myself. I edit it. Actually, I have a human editor who helps me tremendously.
exactly.
Uh,
Yeah, writing it is
but
terrible
yeah,
for. Yeah, it's like for the tech stuff, the brainless stuff. Well, not brainless, but the logic. You can use it for
yeah.
that. But yeah, same here. I do not use it for any writing whatsoever, and any of the creative stuff. And also, me and Greg did not create AI avatars to present ourselves in this life either. I want to disclose that as well, that this is really us. And also, thank you all for joining. Appreciate you engaging in the comments. Appreciate you MVPs here in the chat. We got Carly, we got Adam Ali, who I was literally on the live with yesterday in the chat the whole time. Erica, appreciate you. Jennifer, Arlene, everybody in here who's chiming in. You have been amazing this whole time. We loved your questions. We're going to be doing more of this. Thank you. If you haven't already, Leslie, you too, hit the like button on the way out because it boosts the post afterwards. I'm going to do a write up on this afterwards and then send this out on the newsletter. Subscribe to me at ahmedbaba.news. Become a paid subscriber if you have not yet. And subscribe to my brother Greg Fish at the Cyberpunk Survival Guide to read more tech dedicated content, society content, humanist content. He's not a pro machine. He's not pro clanker. I don't know if you've heard, there's already a racial slur for
It's
AIs.
from Star Wars.
Yeah. So he's not pro clanker. He is pro human. And we are here trying to figure out how we navigate this time. So thank you for joining us. Greg, good talking to you, man.
Always a pleasure.
All right, everybody. See you guys. Okay. We're going to do more of this. Stay tuned in. All right.